The avoidant has spent the entire relationship maintaining control through strategic withdrawal, secure in the unconscious belief that they could always return to you, that their distance was manageable because your presence remained constant, that they held ultimate power to determine the relationship's trajectory. They operated with invisible safety net. No matter how far they withdrew, no matter how unavailable they became, you would remain within reach whenever they decided to move closer. This assumption allowed the avoidant to maintain their defended position without facing genuine consequences. They could have their emotional distance while keeping you available, could protect themselves from vulnerability while retaining access to connection, could avoid intimacy's risks while preserving intimacy's possibility. Then something shifts that the avoidant never truly believed would happen. You do not just leave physically or end the relationship formally. You leave emotionally in ways that cannot be reversed. The avoidant recognizes through your complete disengagement, your visible thriving without them, your obvious investment in life that no longer includes them, that you will never come back. Not because you hate them, not because you are punishing them, but because you have genuinely moved beyond them, because the person you have become no longer has space for someone operating at the emotional capacity the avoidant demonstrated. This recognition triggers psychological responses the avoidant keeps carefully hidden, behaviors they would never admit to, internal processes that contradict everything about their defended exterior. The avoidant, who appeared indifferent during the relationship, who seemed to barely notice your departure, who maintained cool distance even as you walked away, secretly engages in patterns that reveal the depth of impact you had, that their defensive structure prevented them from acknowledging while you were present. These hidden responses expose that the avoidant's defended position was performance rather than reality, that beneath their emotional unavailability existed feelings they could not access until the possibility of your return was permanently foreclosed. They reconstruct the relationship in their mind as perfect. The avoidant spent the entire relationship focusing on what felt uncomfortable, threatening, or suffocating about intimacy with you. They catalogued every moment you requested emotional presence as evidence of pressure. They interpreted your needs as demands. They experienced your vulnerability as burden. They noticed every instance where the relationship required something from them that activated their defensive withdrawal. The avoidant's attention during the relationship oriented toward what felt wrong, what exceeded their capacity, what triggered their need for distance. This selective focus allowed the avoidant to justify their withdrawal, to maintain their defended position, to tell themselves the relationship was not what they wanted. When the avoidant realizes you will never return, their selective attention shifts dramatically. Suddenly, the avoidant begins remembering the relationship through entirely different lens. The moments that felt suffocating when they occurred now appear as evidence of your care. The vulnerability that felt like burden now registers as gift of trust. The needs that seemed excessive now look like reasonable requests for partnership. The avoidance memory reconstructs the relationship by highlighting everything that was actually working, while minimizing or completely forgetting the aspects that triggered their withdrawal. This reconstruction happens gradually as the avoidance defensive structure no longer needs to generate reasons for maintaining distance. While you remained accessible, the avoidance psychology required emphasis on the relationship's problems to justify their emotional unavailability. Once you become permanently unavailable, this defensive need disappears. The avoidant no longer must protect themselves from intimacy with you because that intimacy is no longer possible. This elimination of defensive necessity allows the avoidant to finally see what they could not perceive while defended. The relationship offered exactly what they claimed to want, but their fear prevented them from receiving. The avoidant begins remembering specific moments with clarity that surprises them. They recall how you looked at them with genuine affection, how you made space for their needs even while yours went unmet, how you remained patient through withdrawal that would have driven others away immediately. These memories, which barely registered during the relationship because the avoidant was too defended to receive them, now replay with painful vividness. The avoidant sees retroactively how much you offered, how consistently you showed up, how thoroughly you understood them despite their refusal to be known. The relationship that felt complicated and demanding while occurring now appears as rare gift they were too defended to appreciate. The avoidance reconstruction eventually transforms the relationship into idealized connection that could never exist in reality. The avoidant forgets their own withdrawal patterns, their emotional unavailability, their consistent failure to reciprocate. They remember only your patience, your understanding, your capacity to hold space for their limitations. The avoidant creates narrative where the relationship was perfect, except for unspecified external factors or timing issues that prevented it from working. This idealization protects the avoidant from confronting that their own defensive patterns destroyed something valuable, allowing them to maintain that they lost you to circumstances rather than to their own consistent emotional unavailability. This reconstruction serves crucial psychological function for the avoidant. If they acknowledge that the relationship failed because of their defensive limitations, they must confront that their patterns cost them something precious. This acknowledgement would require examining their defensive structure, recognizing its costs, potentially attempting the terrifying work of change. The idealized reconstruction allows the avoidant to avoid this confrontation. They can position the relationship as perfect love that circumstances prevented, rather than as viable connection they destroyed through their inability to sustain intimacy. The avoidant transforms you into the one who got away rather than the one they pushed away. The perfected version of the relationship the avoidant constructs bears little resemblance to what actually occurred. The avoidant forgets the countless times you expressed hurt at their withdrawal. They minimize the years you spent hoping they would become more available. They erase the moments where their coldness wounded you deeply. The avoidance memory selectively retains only the positive aspects while discarding the pain their patterns created. This selective memory allows them to romanticize the relationship without confronting the reality of how they showed up in it. The avoidant also reconstructs their own role to position themselves as more present than they actually were. They remember the occasional moments they offered vulnerability while forgetting the months of defended distance between those moments. They recall the few times they met your needs, while erasing the countless times they withdrew when you needed them. They preserve memory of their best moments while discarding memory of their consistent patterns. The avoidant creates a version of themselves that could have sustained the relationship they are now idealizing, conveniently forgetting that this idealized version never actually existed. This reconstruction intensifies as time passes, and you remain permanently out of reach. Each year that confirms you will not return allows the avoidant to add more idealized elements to their narrative. The relationship becomes the perfect love they were not ready for, the ideal partnership they could not appreciate at the time, the once-in-a-lifetime connection they let slip away. The avoidant builds elaborate fantasy about what the relationship was and what it could have become if only they had been different, while never actually becoming different, in ways that would allow them to sustain intimate connection with anyone else. The tragedy of this reconstruction is that it prevents the avoidant from accurately understanding what happened and learning from it. The avoidant cannot grow from experience they have completely rewritten. They cannot address patterns they have erased from memory. They cannot develop different capacities when they have convinced themselves the relationship failed for reasons unrelated to their defensive structure. The perfected version of the relationship the avoidant creates ensures they will repeat their patterns with anyone new, destroying future connections through the same defended unavailability while blaming external factors rather than recognizing their consistent role in creating relational failure. They compare every new person to you and find them lacking. The avoidant eventually attempts new connections, entering relationships or dating situations that could potentially develop into something substantial. Yet every new person encounters invisible comparison to the idealized version of you the avoidant has constructed. The avoidant measures every potential partner against the perfected memory of who you were, finding inevitable deficiencies that justify their continued emotional distance. This comparison operates largely outside the avoidant's conscious awareness, manifesting as vague dissatisfaction or sense that something essential is missing, rather than as explicit measurement against you as standard. The new person lacks your particular way of understanding the avoidance patterns. They do not intuitively know when to give space and when to move closer. They have not learned the avoidance nonverbal cues across years of observation. They cannot anticipate the avoidance needs the way you eventually could. The avoidant experiences these gaps as fundamental incompatibility rather than recognizing them as natural consequence of newness. You possessed accumulated knowledge that only time together creates, but the avoidant expects new partners to immediately provide the understanding that you developed across months or years of learning the avoidant's particular rhythms. The avoidant finds that new people respond to their withdrawal differently than you did. They become anxious or pull away when the avoidant creates distance. They do not maintain the patient presence you demonstrated. They lack your capacity to remain warm while giving space. The avoidant interprets these differences as evidence that new people are demanding or unstable, rather than recognizing that your exceptional patience was not standard response, but rather extraordinary capacity most people do not possess. The avoidant has recalibrated their expectations based on your unusual tolerance, now finding typical responses to their withdrawal as proof that others cannot handle them. Every new person also lacks your specific qualities that the avoidant now idealizes but barely noticed during the relationship. They do not share your particular sense of humor that the avoidant found amusing but took for granted. They do not possess your emotional intelligence that the avoidant benefited from without acknowledging. They cannot match your capacity for compassionate understanding that the avoidant experienced as normal rather than rare. The avoidant has forgotten that they barely appreciated these qualities while present, now mourning their absence in new connections, while failing to value what new people actually offer. The comparison becomes self-fulfilling prophecy that prevents the avoidant from genuinely investing in new relationships. The avoidant enters each potential connection with unconscious belief that this person will not measure up to you. This belief creates emotional withholding that prevents new relationships from developing depth that might eventually rival what existed with you. The avoidant never gives new people the time, patience, or investment required to develop comparable connection because they have already decided those people are insufficient. The comparison ensures that no one can compete with you because no one receives the opportunity to become as significant. The avoidant also uses the comparison as convenient justification for maintaining their defended position. When new people request emotional availability, the avoidant can tell themselves that you never made such demands, conveniently forgetting that you absolutely did before eventually exhausting yourself and leaving. When new people express hurt at the avoidant's withdrawal, the avoidant remembers you as never expressing such hurt, erasing the countless times you did. The idealized version of you becomes shield against anyone else's legitimate needs, proof that others want too much compared to your supposed acceptance, despite the reality that your acceptance eventually ended when you chose yourself. The avoidant sometimes explicitly tells new partners about you, presenting you as perfect previous relationship that ended for mysterious reasons unrelated to the avoidant's patterns. This narrative serves to both idealize you further and position the avoidant as someone capable of deep connection, someone who had profound love once and might again under right circumstances. The avoidant uses you as evidence of their relational capacity while conveniently omitting that their defensive patterns destroyed that very relationship. New partners hear about you and wonder how they can compete with this perfected memory, unaware that the reality of the relationship bore little resemblance to the story the avoidant now tells. The comparison also prevents the avoidant from recognizing when new people possess qualities you lacked or offer things you could not provide. The avoidant has closed their perception to accurately seeing new people because all their attention orients toward measuring against you as standard. New partners might be more genuinely secure, more authentically boundaried, more appropriately challenging of the avoidant's patterns, all qualities that would serve the avoidant better than your exceptional patience did. Yet the avoidant cannot perceive these qualities because they are scanning only for match to what you provided, blind to different forms of value. The avoidance comparison creates particular cruelty for new partners who sense they are competing with ghosts they cannot defeat. These new people feel the avoidance emotional unavailability and recognize it stems partly from the avoidant measuring them against someone they can never meet or know. They experience the futility of trying to connect with someone who has decided in advance that they are insufficient replacement. The avoidant's new partners often leave frustrated and hurt, becoming additional relationship failures. The avoidant will eventually idealize and use as comparison against future partners, creating cycle where every ended relationship becomes impossible standard for the next. The avoidant never consciously acknowledges that this comparison pattern stems from their own fear rather than from others' actual inadequacy. The avoidant uses you as shield against risking intimacy with anyone new. By maintaining that no one compares to you, the avoidant justifies never becoming vulnerable enough to discover whether someone else could matter as much or more. The comparison allows the avoidant to remain defended while believing they are simply waiting for the right person, someone who matches the perfected standard you now represent. This belief protects the avoidant from confronting that their defensive structure, not others' inadequacy, prevents them from building substantial connection with anyone. They monitor your life from distance without ever reaching out. The avoidant who once seemed indifferent to your presence now tracks your life with attention they never demonstrated during the relationship. They check your activities through whatever channels remain accessible to them, consuming information about your life while maintaining complete silence. The avoidant scrolls through updates, observes photos, notes changes in your status or circumstances, all while never commenting, never reacting, never revealing their observation. This silent monitoring allows the avoidant to maintain imaginary connection that requires nothing from them, to feel involved in your life without risking the vulnerability that actual contact would demand. This monitoring behavior contradicts everything about the avoidant's presented self-concept. The avoidant who claimed to need space, who withdrew consistently, who appeared barely affected by your departure, now cannot resist seeking information about your current life. The avoidant tells themselves they are simply curious, that their observation means nothing significant, that they are just checking in occasionally out of residual concern. Yet the consistency of their monitoring, the attention they pay to details, the emotional response they experience to what they observe, all reveal investment they could never acknowledge while you were accessible. The avoidant experiences complex emotions during this monitoring that they process entirely internally. When they see evidence of your happiness, they feel simultaneous relief and devastation. Relief that you are doing well, that their patterns did not destroy you permanently, that you have recovered from whatever pain the relationship's end created. Devastation that your well-being does not require them, that you have built satisfying life without their presence, that you appear genuinely content in ways you never did while trying to maintain connection with them. The avoidant wanted you to be okay, but unconsciously hoped you would not be too okay, that some visible evidence of missing them would be apparent. The avoidant particularly monitors for signs of new romantic involvement, experiencing emotions they have no framework to process. When evidence suggests you are seeing someone new, the avoidant feels jealousy they cannot acknowledge because jealousy would require admitting they care deeply about someone they pushed away through their own patterns. The avoidant examines whatever information is available about your new person, comparing themselves unfavorably while simultaneously dismissing the new person as inadequate for you. The avoidant wants to believe no one can provide what they could have provided while refusing to acknowledge that what they actually provided was consistent emotional unavailability. The monitoring creates painful awareness of what the avoidant is missing. They observe you at events they would have been included in had they sustained the relationship. They see you with friends they might have known. They watch you experience things they could have shared. The avoidant confronts in concrete terms the life that could have been theirs had they possessed capacity to remain emotionally present. This vicarious participation in your life from enforced distance highlights everything their defensive structure cost them in ways that abstract recognition never could. The avoidant also uses monitoring to maintain fantasy that they could re-enter your life if they chose. By staying informed about your circumstances, by knowing your current situation, the avoidant preserves belief that the door remains open even when all evidence demonstrates you have moved beyond them. The monitoring allows the avoidant to feel they are staying connected, that they maintain option to reach out whenever they develop capacity to do so, that the relationship exists in suspended state rather than having completely ended. This fantasy protects the avoidant from fully grieving the loss because they have not accepted the loss as final. The avoidant sometimes composes messages they never send, crafting careful words that would explain their patterns, apologize for their limitations, or express feelings they could not access during the relationship. These unsent messages accumulate in the avoidant's mind or phone, representing vulnerability they approach but cannot quite execute. The avoidant tells themselves they will send the message when timing is right, when they have changed enough to deserve response, when circumstances align properly. Yet the timing never comes because the avoidant's defensive structure prevents the vulnerability that sending would require. The unsent messages become artifacts of connection the avoidant cannot actualize. The monitoring also serves to confirm the avoidant's narrative about why the relationship ended. When they observe you thriving, appearing confident and content, the avoidant tells themselves you were always too independent to need them, too self-sufficient to value what they offered, too complete on your own to require their presence. This interpretation protects the avoidant from acknowledging that you became this self-sufficient, partly in response to their unavailability, that your independence developed as adaptation to being in relationship with someone who could not be depended upon. The avoidant uses your current strength as retrospective justification for their past withdrawal. The avoidant experiences particular pain when they observe evidence that you have truly moved on in ways that erase their significance. They see you reference experiences without mentioning them, watch you celebrate achievements they have no part in, observe you building life that contains no space for them even in memory. The avoidant realizes they are becoming increasingly irrelevant to your narrative, that time is moving you further from the period when they mattered. This gradual erasure forces recognition that while they are monitoring you with sustained attention, you are likely not thinking about them at all. The avoidant maintains this monitoring pattern for months or years, unable to stop seeking information about you while never acting on what they learn. The behavior becomes compulsive, something they do without conscious decision, automatically seeking updates whenever opportunity presents. The monitoring provides hollow substitute for actual connection, allowing the avoidant to feel they have relationship with you that exists entirely in their observation and imagination. This one-sided connection, where they consume information about your life while contributing nothing to it, represents perfect expression of the avoidant's relational capacity. Intense internal investment, combined with complete external unavailability. They finally feel the grief they suppressed while you were present. During the relationship and immediately following your departure, the avoidant's defensive structure prevented them from accessing genuine grief about the loss. The avoidant felt relief at the removal of pressure, satisfaction at reclaimed autonomy, perhaps vague discomfort at the change, but not the deep grief that losing someone significant should generate. The avoidant's psychology could not permit full emotional experience of the loss, while any possibility of your return existed because grief would require acknowledging how much you mattered, which would contradict the defended position that required minimizing your importance. The avoidant could not simultaneously maintain that they needed space from you and fully feel the devastation of losing you. When the avoidant realizes you will never come back, the defensive necessity for suppressing grief disappears. You are gone permanently. The relationship has irrevocably ended. There is no strategic advantage to minimizing the loss because the loss is complete regardless of how the avoidant feels about it. This elimination of defensive purpose allows feelings the avoidant has been unconsciously holding at bay to finally surface. The grief arrives not as single, overwhelming wave, but as gradual flooding that intensifies as the avoidant's defenses against it prove unsustainable once their function has disappeared. The avoidant begins experiencing delayed emotional response to loss that occurred months or years earlier. They feel the full weight of having pushed away someone who cared for them deeply, someone who understood them despite their defended presentation, someone who offered exactly the patient presence their wounds required, but their fear prevented them from receiving. The avoidant grieves not just losing you, but losing what the relationship represented. Proof that someone could see them clearly and choose them anyway. Evidence that they were capable of mattering profoundly to another person. Possibility that intimate connection might be accessible despite their limitations. This delayed grief carries particular intensity because it arrives without the comfort that immediate grief provides. When loss is fresh, grieving person can still feel the warmth of what was lost, can access recent memories of presence and connection, can hold the relationship as something that just existed. The avoidance delayed grief arrives after the relationship has receded into past, after the visceral sense of your presence has faded, after time has already created distance that makes the loss feel even more complete. The avoidant grieves not just what they lost, but the fact that they lost it so long ago, without fully feeling the loss, that they have been moving through life carrying unprocessed grief that is only now demanding acknowledgement. The avoidant also grieves the person they were during the relationship, recognizing retroactively how defended they remained, how unavailable they were, how thoroughly their fear governed their behavior. They see with painful clarity how they showed up, how little they offered, how consistently they withdrew when you needed them present. This recognition creates grief about their own limitations, about the gulf between who they were and who they needed to be to sustain the relationship. The avoidant mourns not just losing you, but losing the opportunity to be different with you, the chance to overcome their patterns before those patterns destroyed something valuable. This regret-laden grief proves particularly difficult to process because the avoidant cannot undo what they destroyed. If external circumstances had ended the relationship, the avoidant could imagine different scenarios where things worked out. When the avoidant's own patterns caused the ending, they face that different scenario would have required them being a fundamentally different person, possessing capacities they lacked. The avoidant cannot fantasize about what might have been without confronting that what might have been required them transcending limitations that still constrain them. The grief contains recognition that they were not then and may never be capable of sustaining the very thing they now mourn losing. The avoidant experiences waves of grief triggered by random reminders that surface without warning. A song you liked, a place you went together, an activity you shared, even unrelated experiences that somehow evoke your memory can send the avoidant into painful awareness of your absence. These grief episodes feel inappropriate in their timing, arriving years after the relationship ended when the avoidant should have moved on. Yet the grief was never properly processed during appropriate time frame, so it surfaces whenever triggers penetrate the avoidant's defensive structure, creating emotional experiences the avoidant has no context to explain to anyone who might observe their reaction. The avoidant processes this grief largely in isolation because their defensive structure prevents them from seeking support during emotional difficulty. They cannot explain to others why they are grieving relationship that ended years ago, why they are finally feeling loss they appeared unaffected by at the time, why someone they seemed indifferent to now generates such intense pain. The avoidance grief remains private, processed alone, another experience of isolation that reinforces the very patterns that created the loss they are grieving. The avoidant mourns alone because their defensive structure prevents the vulnerability that seeking comfort would require, creating additional layer of loss about their inability to let anyone help them through their pain.